Oh, honey, you don't mind sharing the spotlight, do you? After all, I look absolutely stunning in white. Those were the exact words my sister-in-law Sandra whispered to me as she walked into my wedding venue wearing a floor-length white gown with a train longer than mine. My name is Emily Watson. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a digital forensics specialist for Morrison & Associates in Seattle. That Saturday afternoon in September, as I stood there in my own wedding dress watching Sandra pose for photos like she was the bride, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. I simply smiled, nodded politely, and said, "You look lovely, Sandra. Very memorable." What Sandra didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I had received an anonymous email with a video attachment that would change everything. The subject line read, "Thought you should know before the wedding." The timestamp on that video was from last Tuesday, 2:47 p.m., filmed through what appeared to be a gym window. Sandra Williams, my fiancé Jake's older sister, was in a very compromising position with her personal trainer, Marcus Rodriguez, on the massage table at Elite Fitness on Pine Street. The audio was crystal clear, including Sandra's voice saying, "My husband thinks I'm at book club. God, he's so clueless. You have to understand, Sandra had made my life miserable for the entire 2 years Jake and I had been together. She was 35, married to David Williams for 8 years, and worked as a real estate agent for Prestige Properties. From day one, she positioned herself as the family matriarch, the one whose opinion mattered most. She had 3 children, twin boys aged 6 and a daughter aged 4, and used them as weapons whenever she wanted to manipulate family gatherings. "The kids will be so disappointed if Emily doesn't make her special cookies," she'd say, then criticize everything I baked. "Well, it's not how our grandmother made them, but I suppose they'll do." Sandra had a particular talent for backhanded compliments that left everyone uncomfortable but unable to call her out directly. At Jake's birthday party last year, she announced to everyone, "Emily's job is so interesting. I mean, who would have thought someone could make a career out of looking at other people's deleted files? It must be nice to work with computers instead of real people." When I tried to explain that digital forensics involved solving actual crimes and helping victims get justice, she just smiled and said, "That's nice, dear. David, could you help me with something important?" The video I received wasn't just a random recording. As I analyzed it with my professional software, I discovered it was shot with a high-end camera, not a phone. The angle was too perfect, too steady. Someone had planned this. I ran the metadata through my systems and found it was recorded using a Canon EOS R5, the same camera David Williams used for his photography hobby. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. David wasn't just discovering his wife's affair, he was documenting it, and he wanted me to have the evidence before my wedding day. I called David from an encrypted line I used for work. When he answered, his voice was hollow. "Emily, I was wondering when you'd call." "David, we need to talk, not over the phone." We met at a small coffee shop in Ballard the next morning. David looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. He confirmed what I'd suspected. "I've known for 6 months, he told me, stirring his coffee with shaking hands. "I hired a private investigator initially, but then I started documenting everything myself. The gym sessions that weren't on her schedule, the book club meetings that other members knew nothing about, the credit card charges at hotels I'd never heard of. Why are you showing me this before my wedding?" David's laugh was bitter. "Because Sandra's planning something for your big day. I overheard her on the phone with her friend Kelly last week. She said, and I quote, 'I'm going to make sure everyone remembers this wedding, but not for the reasons Emily expects. She thinks she's so perfect with her fancy job and her designer dress. Wait until she sees what I have planned.' That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront Sandra or cause a scene. I was going to let her destroy herself. And I was going to make sure everyone saw it happen. You see, when you work in digital forensics, you learn patience. You don't rush to judgment. You gather evidence. You build your case methodically, and you present facts in a way that leaves no room for doubt or manipulation. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. First, I had my wedding videographer, Tom Chen from Emerald City Productions, install a backup AV system that I could control from my phone. The setup cost me an extra $200, but I told Tom it was for a special surprise during my reception speech. Then I had my IT friend Marcus, different Marcus thankfully, create a seamless video presentation that would look like a standard wedding slideshow. The VI. Cheating video would be embedded in what appeared to be a tribute to family members. I also did something Sandra would never expect. I documented everything she did leading up to the wedding. Every snide comment, every attempt to change my plans, every manipulation. My friend Lisa, who works as a court reporter, helped me create timestamps and context for each incident. We built a case file that even Sandra couldn't twist or deny. The morning of my wedding, Sandra texted me, "Can't wait to see everyone's faces today. Some surprises are worth the wait." I screenshot the message and filed it with the rest of my evidence. At this point, I had over 47 pieces of documentation spanning 6 months of Sandra's behavior, including the infidelity evidence David had provided. The ceremony itself went beautifully, despite Sandra's white dress drawing shocked whispers from our guests. She positioned herself prominently in family photos and even tried to stand next to Jake during our group shots. I remained calm and gracious, even complimenting her dress in front of everyone. "Sandra looks absolutely radiant today," I announced to the photographer. "Make sure you get some good shots of her. I have a feeling this dress will be very memorable." Sandra preened at the attention, not realizing she was digging her own grave with every pose and every smug smile. My photographer, Rebecca Martinez, caught every moment. Sandra throwing her arms around Jake, Sandra positioning herself in the center of family photos, Sandra raising her glass during toasts as if she were the bride. All of it perfectly documented. During the cocktail hour, Sandra held court near the bar, regaling guests with stories about how she'd helped plan my wedding. "Emily's taste is a bit simple," she told my college friends, gesturing with her martini glass. I had to step in and suggest some upgrades. After all, the Williams family has certain standards to maintain. What she didn't know was that my maid of honor, Jennifer, was recording audio on her phone. We'd planned this in advance, knowing Sandra couldn't resist making herself the center of attention. The moment I'd been waiting for came during dinner, just before the speeches began. I stood up with my champagne glass, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate Jake and me," I began, my voice steady and warm. "Before we begin the traditional toasts, I wanted to share something special, a video montage of our families, the people who made us who we are today." I nodded to Tom, who started the presentation on the large screens positioned around the reception hall. The video began beautifully. Childhood photos of Jake and me, family holidays, graduations. Sandra was beaming, clearly expecting to be featured prominently. And she was about to be, just not in the way she'd imagined. "Family," I continued, "teaches us so much about loyalty, commitment, and showing our true selves to the people we love." The slideshow continued with recent photos of family gatherings, including several shots of Sandra at various events, always positioning herself as the center of attention. Some family members go above and beyond to make themselves unforgettable. That's when the video shifted. Suddenly, on every screen in the room, crystal clear security footage showed Sandra and Marcus at Elite Fitness. The audio was perfect. "My husband thinks I'm at book club. God, he's so clueless." The timestamp clearly showed this was recorded just 3 weeks before my wedding, during the time Sandra was supposedly helping me finalize wedding details. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Sandra's face went from confused to horrified to panicked in the span of about 5 seconds. She turned to look at David, who was staring at her with an expression of cold fury. Their 3 children, thankfully, were in the kids' room with the babysitter we'd hired. "Turn it off!" Sandra screamed, jumping up from her table. "Turn it off right now!" But the video kept playing. Marcus, her trainer, was clearly visible saying, "What about your brother's wedding?" And Sandra's response, captured in perfect audio, "Oh, I have special plans for that little princess's wedding. She thinks she's so perfect. I'm going to wear my white evening gown and make sure everyone knows the Williams family doesn't revolve around her. I maintained my composure completely, standing at the microphone with my champagne glass still raised. As I was saying, I continued calmly, family shows us who people really are when they think no one is watching. David stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor in the silence. Sandra Williams, he said, his voice carrying across the entire reception hall. I want you to leave. Now. Don't come home tonight. Don't come home. Ever again. Sandra looked around the room desperately, trying to find allies, but every face stared back at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. My new mother-in-law, Patricia, looked absolutely mortified. Jake's father, Robert, was shaking his head in disbelief. Even Sandra's closest friends seemed stunned into silence. This is fake, Sandra shrieked, pointing at the screens. She created this. She works with computers. She made this up because she's jealous of me. That's when David pulled out his phone and showed it to the entire room. I have 17 more videos, Sandra. All different dates, all different locations. The Marriott on 4th Avenue last Thursday at 3:15 p.m. The Sheraton downtown 2 weeks ago during lunch. Should I keep going? Jake, my new husband, stood up beside me and put his arm around my waist. For a moment, I thought he might defend his sister, but instead, he said, Sandra, you wore a white dress to my wife's wedding and tried to upstage her on her own day. Even without this video, your behavior today has been absolutely unacceptable. Sandra made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. She turned to Patricia, her mother-in-law, with tears streaming down her face. Mom, you can't believe this. Emily planned this whole thing because she's always been threatened by me. She's trying to destroy your family. Patricia Williams, a dignified woman in her 60s, stood up slowly. Sandra, I watched you walk into this wedding today wearing white. I heard you tell people you helped plan this wedding when I know for a fact Emily did everything herself. I've watched you try to undermine this girl for 2 years. The video just confirms what we've all suspected about your character. The final nail in Sandra's coffin came from an unexpected source. Kelly Morrison, Sandra's supposed best friend and accomplice, stood up from her table near the back. I can't do this anymore, she announced to the room. Sandra asked me to help her make Emily's wedding memorable, and I thought she meant something harmless. I helped her pick out the white dress. I thought it was just a petty joke, but this... She gestured at the screens, which were now showing the initial family slideshow again. This is sick, Sandra. You're a married woman with children. Sandra looked around the room one more time, realizing that her entire social network had just collapsed in the span of 5 minutes. She tried once more. David, please, think about the kids. Think about our life together. David's response was final. I am thinking about the kids. That's why I've already filed for divorce and custody. My lawyer received all this evidence 3 days ago. The papers will be served Monday morning. That's when Sandra finally understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about exposing her affair at my wedding. This was about destroying the entire house of cards she'd built her life on. She'd lost her husband, her children, her social circle, and her reputation in one evening. Security. Yes, we'd hired security, because I'd suspected Sandra might cause a scene, escorted her out of the venue. As she was led toward the exit, she turned back and screamed, You planned this whole thing, you manipulative bitch! I finally allowed myself a small smile. Sandra, I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the silent reception hall. I didn't plan anything. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself. The white dress was your choice. The affair was your choice. Trying to upstage me at my own wedding was your choice. I simply made sure everyone could see who you really are. The door closed behind her, and after a moment of stunned silence, my guests burst into applause. Not polite wedding applause, but the kind of applause you hear when justice is served. My grandfather, a retired police officer, actually stood up and saluted me. The rest of the reception was magical. Without Sandra's toxic presence, everyone relaxed and had genuine fun. David stayed for the entire evening, and several family members made a point of telling him he was better off without her. My new in-laws apologized repeatedly for Sandra's behavior and thanked me for handling the situation with such grace. Jake pulled me aside during our first dance. "I can't believe you dealt with all of this and still managed to have the perfect wedding," he said. "How did you stay so calm?" "Because I learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't getting angry," I told him. "It's staying professional and letting people destroy themselves with their own choices. Sandra didn't need me to ruin her life. She did that all by herself. I just made sure everyone was watching when it happened." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. David filed for divorce on Monday morning, citing adultery and requesting full custody of the children. Sandra's real estate license was suspended pending investigation after 3 clients came forward claiming she'd been absent during crucial negotiations, presumably during her affair sessions. Elite Fitness terminated Marcus immediately and banned Sandra from all their locations. The video of Sandra's wedding meltdown went viral after several guests posted it on social media. Within a week, she'd become a cautionary tale about karma and wedding etiquette across multiple platforms. Her real estate company, Prestige Properties, quietly let her go after the negative publicity began affecting their other agents. But the most satisfying consequence came 3 months later. Sandra had been trying to rebuild her life, claiming to anyone who would listen that I'd manipulated the situation and that she was the real victim. She even started a blog called "When Family Betrays You," where she painted herself as the wronged party. That's when David's lawyer contacted me with interesting news. During the divorce proceedings, they'd discovered that Sandra had been embezzling money from her children's college funds to pay for her affair expenses: hotel rooms, expensive lingerie, jewelry for her trainer. All of it funded by money that was supposed to secure her kids' futures. The total amount was $23,147, documented across 8 months of financial records. This gave David grounds to pursue criminal charges, not just civil ones. Sandra was arrested at her new apartment on a Tuesday morning at 6:30 a.m., in full view of her neighbors. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, and child endangerment through financial abuse. Her mugshot made the local news that evening. I could have felt sorry for her at that point, but then I remembered her words from my wedding day. "You planned this whole thing, you manipulative bitch." Sandra never took responsibility for her choices. Even facing criminal charges, she continued to blame everyone else for the consequences of her own actions. The criminal trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified about my digital forensics findings, which had helped uncover the financial crimes. Sandra's defense team tried to paint me as a vindictive sister-in-law who'd orchestrated their client's downfall, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records don't lie, and neither do timestamps on security footage. Sandra was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to her children's college funds. The judge, Honorable Margaret Chen, made a statement that I'll never forget. "Mrs. Williams, you seem to believe that you are the victim in this situation, but you stole from your own children, betrayed your husband, and tried to sabotage your family member's wedding day. These were all choices you made freely. The consequences you're facing are not the result of other people's vindictiveness, but of your own actions coming to light. Jake and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary last month with a small dinner party. David was there with his new girlfriend, Sarah, a kindergarten teacher who's wonderful with his children. Patricia and Robert brought photo albums from our wedding, and we laughed about how perfectly everything had turned out despite Sandra's attempts at sabotage. "Do you ever regret exposing her so publicly?" Sarah asked me over coffee. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that. Those children had to lose their mother to prison. I regret that David wasted 8 years with someone who didn't value him. But do I regret making sure Sandra faced consequences for her choices? Not for a second. The truth is, Sandra had been destroying people quietly for years. She'd undermined colleagues, manipulated family members, and taught her children that lying and scheming were acceptable ways to get what you wanted. Someone had to hold her accountable, and it turned out that someone was me. Sometimes people ask if I planned the whole thing as elaborate revenge. The answer is both yes and no. I didn't create Sandra's affair, choose her white dress, or force her to embezzle from her children. Those were all her decisions. But once I had evidence of her true character, I absolutely planned to give her enough rope to hang herself in the most public way possible. My profession taught me that evidence tells its own story. You don't need to manipulate or exaggerate. You just need to present facts clearly and let people draw their own conclusions. Sandra's behavior at my wedding, captured on video and witnessed by 57 people, spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that toxic people often destroy themselves if you're patient enough to let them. Sandra spent so much energy trying to make me look bad that she forgot to cover her own tracks. She was so convinced of her own cleverness that she never considered the possibility that someone might be smarter, more patient, and more strategic than she was. Today, Jake and I are happily married, David and his children are thriving, and Sandra is serving her sentence while taking court-mandated courses in financial responsibility and anger management. Her blog about being betrayed by family was shut down after her conviction, when it became clear that her version of events was entirely fabricated. Sometimes karma needs a little help from digital forensics and careful documentation. But mostly, it just needs patience and the wisdom to let toxic people reveal themselves in their own time and in their own way. Sandra Williams taught me that the most satisfying revenge isn't striking back in anger. It's staying calm, professional, and prepared while your enemies destroy themselves with their own poor choices. And that, as they say, is how you turn a wedding crasher in white into a convicted felon in orange. The best part? She did all the hard work herself. I just made sure everyone was watching.